Hi, I'm Brenda Bailey for Pie Plate Patterns, and for our tutorial today we're going to talk about half square triangles. And a half square triangle is just a square with half of it one color and half of it another color. Before we show you how to make one, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about fabric. This piece of fabric here has 3 grains. Any piece of fabric does. If you pull this, it's just, there's no give. So I know that this is the part that goes parallel to the selvage. This right here is the crossways grain, so it goes from selvage to selvage. And then we have the bias grain, which has so much give. Now our seam on the half square triangle is going to be on the bias, and so it has so much give that it's really better if we don't cut our fabric first. Some people in some patterns have you take your square, because you cut out a square first, and then cut it in half from corner to corner, so you have a triangle. And this works, except you have to be really careful when you sew these together, because this is the bias. This is where you're going to be sewing, and it's the bias, and so it's going to really stretch. So you have to be so careful. So a lot of patterns will have you do that. Just cut your square and then cut it in half, and then sew them together, and so that will be your half square triangle. Now that will work, but like I say, I don't like to cut mine until after I've done the sewing. So what I do is cut 2 squares, one of each color, and I draw a diagonal line on the lighter color from corner to corner. And I always use a mechanical pencil because you get a nice sharp line there. And then I'm going to put these together, right sides together, and I'm going to stitch them. And I've already done that with this one, and I did it in a purple thread so you can see. I stitched 1/4 inch on both sides of the marked line. Now, when I sew this, it doesn't stretch because I didn't have it cut. It does stretch a tiny bit maybe, but not too bad. And you can cut it apart on the line. You can use your scissors or you can use your rotary cutter. And then when you open it up, you have 2 half square triangles. And then I would press it to the darker color. So when I press it, I'd lay it here, I'd put my iron, and then I'd fold it back. When I make half square triangles, there is a system that you can use a 7/8. If you want a 4-inch finished half square triangle, you would add 7/8 of an inch to the square that you cut out. I prefer to add a whole inch because then I can make sure that I get a perfect half square triangle when I'm finished. Sometimes, as careful as I can be trying to get my 1/4 inch exactly, sometimes it's not exact, and then my half square triangle doesn't turn out exact. But if you use whichever method you use, you will have these dog ears and you need to cut them off. So I made this, I cut these squares 5 inches, so it's going to be a 4-inch finished. And so then I'm going to trim this. I would press it first, so we'll pretend like it's pressed. I'm going to put my 45-degree angle on the line, and then I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm going to trim it on 2 sides. And I'm using a 6.5 inch square ruler, which works really well. Any ruler with a 45-degree angle will work. And I'm going to put my 4.5 inch line here and 4.5 inch line there, and then trim the other 2 sides. And sometimes you'll just have just a hair or 2, just a thread or 2 there that you're going to cut off, but it makes the perfect half square triangle with your seam exactly in the corner. So when you go to sew it in your quilt, it's going to fit exactly. I have a little problem sometimes when I sew my 1/4 inch on both sides, that my seam kind of veers out or veers in when I get towards the end. And if you have that same problem, I found one way to kind of fix that, and that is to chain stitch your half square triangle pieces together. And I've chained these. I don't know if you can see the stitching on them because it's just the white on white, but I've chained them, and then it helps you keep going a little bit straighter. I don't know why that works, but it works for me. So if you kind of have a tendency to veer in or veer out with your stitches, just chain yours together if you're making more than one. I love half square triangles. There's so many things you can do with them. And next week we're going to talk about a way you can make a different way to make half square triangles, and then some fun ideas on how you can use these in a quilt. See you next week.